Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Amanda Show. So, I've got quite a number of interesting stories for you today. So, we are going to begin with what is going on in between Israel, Palestine, and Egypt. So, we know that back in May, Israel stationed its troops at the border, completely took control of the border between Gaza and Egypt. Well, now Israel is stating that they are not going to leave that place, and apparently the United States is supporting them, even if this is in violation of the Camp David Accords that Israel and Egypt had several decades ago. We'll discuss that in this video. From there, we are moving over to a new update that is coming out from the British Armed Forces. So apparently, the armed forces of the Great Britain are recruiting soldiers from Commonwealth nations like Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, Kenya, and the rest of them, even also countries outside of Africa like India, Sri Lanka. And I'm seeing some Africans are saying, yes, this is the opportunity to relocate and hopefully go to greener pastures in Great Britain. So I want to use this opportunity to discuss not just this recruitment drive from the British Armed Forces with the Commonwealth nations, but also take a look back at history, how getting involved in wars that does not concern us has benefited Africa over the decades. And then we'll round up this episode of the Amanda Show with an update coming out of Burkina Faso. This last week, rather, last week, the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, has rejected IMF loans. But because before now, the IMF was in talks with Burkina Faso about certain things to set up within their country to get loans from the IMF. So now I think that the president of Burkina Faso is deciding to take it out on its own. Let Burkina Faso experiment and see how they can develop without IMF loans. That's a very interesting conversation that I want us to have today because I'm rooting for Burkina Faso because I want to see how far can Burkina Faso take this. Who knows, this can be a model for other African nations to adopt. As always, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends so that we can reach more people across the continent and across the world as we're coming together to build our amazing continent. Thank you for joining me in this episode of The Amanda Show. Let's begin. We kick off this episode of The Amanda Show with a new development that is coming out of the Middle East Africa. So, since October last year, there's been a conflict, there's been a war, not a conflict, there's been a war with Israel and the Palestinians. Israel is looking to get rid of Hamas. Well, that's not, I don't want to delve into that whole thing now. What I want to discuss is that back in May, when Israel wanted to go into Rafah, and the whole world was saying, no, don't go in, don't go in. Israel insisted and said that Rafah is one of the strongholds of Hamas and insisted to get into the place, even if the whole world was saying, don't do this. Anyway, Israel did it. And once they got into Rafah, they took control of the entire border between Gaza and Egypt. Now, this border, that's what I'm talking about because Egypt is an African nation. So whatever happens up there still affects the rest of us. Right in this area, there's something called the Philadelphia Corridor, if I'm not mistaken about the name. And this was when Israel and Egypt reached a peace settlement in the 1970s under U.S. President Carter. This corridor was one of the places that Israel relinquished control over. So Israel said, you know what, we're going to step out of this place so that Egypt will have diplomatic relations with Israel and also allow Israeli ships to pass through the Suez Canal. Now, this is called the Camp David Accords. So when Israel got into this place in May, the whole world was saying, look, I'm sorry, the whole world was saying, look, Israel is violating the Camp David Accords because this is the reason that a peace exists between Israel and Egypt. But anyway, under Netanyahu, they thought it was a wise idea and they got in. Now, I'm talking about this now because a report came out this week in the Times of Israel, and this was from an Israeli official who spoke to the Times of Israel. And so he said that Israel is going to permanently station troops in that border between Gaza and Egypt. Israel is going to permanently station troops in this area, and it has the blessings of the United States. Who said this? An Israeli official to the Times of Israel. Listen, this war between Israel and Hamas slash the Palestinians has been a very educative moment for me. Two major things I have learned from this war is that number one, human rights. doesn't mean anything to this world. Because the people who keep preaching human rights, who keep preaching equality, who keep preaching behave properly, are those who are supporting what we are seeing in Gaza. In my life, I have never seen such inhumane action. I know we read about it in history, these things happen, but this one is happening before our very eyes. And we are the generation of the people, we are the generation that were trained about the atrocities committed during World War II. And one of the things we were told in our schools and even within our social communication is that this kind of thing should not happen again. Yet, in front of everybody, what is going on in Gaza is happening, supported by the people who are telling the rest of the world human rights. So I learned this whole thing has taught me that human rights doesn't exist. It's just a card that certain people play when they are not getting their way, or when they want to force their way into a certain conversation or a certain territory. That is when we see the whole human rights things. Because tell me, there is no bigger violation of human rights than what we are seeing in Gaza. You may argue, because right, I know this is a very touchy subject. A lot of people have things that they say, oh, Hamas started it, and some people say, well, Hamas is a result of what of Israeli policy to the Palestinians for decades. All those things. See, I'm not taking sides anywhere. All I'm saying is that we can all agree that it's not okay to kill children. I'm seeing children with their limbs blown off. I'm seeing toddlers dismembered with bombs. I'm seeing parents carrying their children in plastic bags. This thing is not okay. There's no how you want to spin it. We can all agree from a humanitarian point of view, as human beings, at our core, in our essence, we can all agree that it's not okay to kill children. It's not okay. So that's one thing that I have learned with this Israel and Palestine, this thing that is going on since October last year. That's one thing I have learned. Another thing I have learned is that do not be weak. Don't be weak. You see the reason why nobody can try nonsense with Russia? If, no matter how much they don't like Russia, no matter how much, like, I think that was sometime last year, a Polish official from the Poland government, he tweeted, I can't, it's your language, but I may not pronounce it properly, but mostly like Russia, like in essence, he said that Russia must be destroyed. They may have the intentions to destroy Russia, but they cannot destroy Russia because Russia is strong. It's the same thing that is helping China. No matter how you want, you say, oh, China is a threat to our global hegemony. China is the reason we're not the sole world power, blah, blah, blah. You can get angry at that, but you can't do anything per se against China. Why? China is strong. The same thing that is protecting North Korea. How yes, they just throw sanctions at North Korea. They've been living with it for decades anyway. So what am I saying? Don't be weak. And I'm saying that for us in Africa. Because if it was a strong nation that was bordering Egypt and Gaza, if Egypt was a military powerhouse on a global stage, Israel would not have so blatantly come out to say they are taking control of the border. You would, because you would think, if it's a feared nation, there are certain things you will not do. If it was China that was bordering Gaza, would this kind of thing have happened? At least United States would have spoken to Israel. But no. So I'm saying this for we Africans, that no matter how much people say human rights and freedom and democracy and tell the whole world this is how to behave, at the end of the day, when you take your time to look at the policies that these so-called people are pushing around the world, there's no bigger violation of human rights than it. So I'm saying this to we in Africa. Let us learn that the major way that we can preserve ourselves, the major way we can preserve our societies and our existence is by being strong. Nobody has respect for weak nations. And I'm not just saying it just because of Israel and United States and the rest of them. I'm also saying it to other countries that may think that, oh, these ones are our friends, like Russia, China. Nobody will play with a strong nation. But when you are weak, as many nations in Africa are, nobody takes you seriously. They'll do with you as they please. So now that I've said that, I want us to now take a closer look at this news story that's just coming out. So apparently, like I said in the beginning of this segment, apparently Israel is not going to leave the border between Gaza and Egypt. This is clearly in violation of the Camp David Accords. What is the Camp David Accords? So, Israel and Egypt had a war in the several decades ago. They had a war and they went to war. I said they had a war. They went to war several decades ago. And one of the things that arose from that is that the whole world said, you know what, we need peace. And United States under Jimmy Carter, if I'm not mistaken, because it was in the 1970s, under Jimmy Carter decided let's bring peace between Israel and Egypt. And so they came to a conclusion and if an arrangement for peace, which is the Camp David Accords. In the Camp David Accords, Israel was going to withdraw from Sinai, and then in return, Egypt was going to establish diplomatic relations with formal diplomatic relations with Israel, and not only that, it was also going to allow Israeli ships pass through the Suez Canal. And so this is what led to the peace that we've had between Egypt and Israel today. So when Israel went into Rafah in back in May, the whole world was yelling about this whole Camp David Accord. So many of us, including myself, just assumed that once Israel is done doing what it wants to do with Hamas, it would leave the border between Gaza and Egypt so that things can continue. But apparently, this news is just coming out now that Israel is going to be permanently, Israeli troops are going to be permanently stationed in this border. Now, many people, and this is with the blessing of the United States. Now, many people are wondering, so why is why is Egypt taking this? Because if this is a clear violation of the Camp David Accords and it's a clear violation of your sovereignty, why is Egypt taking it, sitting down? A lot of people have said, oh, because that's the president, El Sisi, that's the president of Egypt, is a puppet, blah, blah, blah. But I'm thinking that perhaps this is Egypt is keeping quiet about this because it doesn't want a wider war. That's what I'm thinking. Because if Egypt uses this as saying, you know what, we are breaking diplomatic relations with Israel, blah blah blah, it can trigger. We don't know how things because right now the situation in the Middle East is very tense. So it's better to calm the whole thing than adding fuel to the fire. And who knows how wide this thing will escalate. Most of the leaders in the world do not want any war. But to me, the only people who are looking for war is Netanyahu's government. Netanyahu's government is looking for a war because clearly, I think this is my opinion. I think what he wanted to achieve in Gaza has eluded him because look at we are seeing it. If they say they are done with Hamas here, then they leave and go to this place. The next thing we see Hamas pops up here, blah blah. So right now it's clear that the whole project of entering into Gaza has failed. The reason why Israel entered Gaza has failed. They have not gotten rid of Hamas. Instead, what are we seeing? The rest of the world is getting mad at Israel, and rightly so. And rightly so. It's not okay to kill people, civilians, and mass like this. If it's military targets you're taking out, fine. We are seeing they're bringing out a whole school, killing 300 people, killing hundreds of people, and to remove four Hamas officials. You can't. Human life should mean something. Even if you want to persecute a war, human life should mean something. So clearly, like I was saying, this has shown that the whole project of getting into Gaza has failed. What they wanted to achieve, they have failed. So maybe Netanyahu, and right now, even if you look at within the society in Israel, Netanyahu is very unpopular. Even before this whole thing happened in Gaza and then Israeli troops marched into Gaza, Netanyahu was already having issues of corruption and this whole thing he wanted to adjust the judiciary system. He was already having issues in Israel before this thing escalated. Do you get me? So maybe this is a way to save Netanyahu's political face. I don't know, but based on the news that I'm seeing, it is Netanyahu that is pushing for war. He's looking for war. That is why he's been provoking, pushing, and punching Iran. That's the reason why he's doing those things. Hopefully, because he knows if Israel cannot face Iran. So hopefully, he's looking for how to draw the United States into the whole conversation to get a wider regional war. So, in the interest of peace, I'm looking that perhaps this is why the president of Egypt and the government of Egypt are looking away from some provocative actions that Israel is taking against Egyptian sovereignty. But even having said that, I just want to use this time to quickly look at Israel. It is not in Israel's interest. What Netanyahu is doing in Israel is not in Israel's interest. Never has there been a time, to the best of my knowledge, never has there been a time that public opinion is so turned against Israel like this. Never. And I mean not just public opinion in the rest of the world, like we in the global south, particularly countries like South Africa that went through apartheid. Uh, So countries like South Africa, we've known that the public opinion has been strong against Israel. But in countries in the West, like United States, Great Britain, Germany, France, we are seeing protests. We just saw the DNC had their it took place this week. Yeah, it ended on Thursday. The DNC took place this week. When that thing was going on, you saw the protests for Palestine protests that were going on. This is the United States, the biggest funder of Israel's war, the biggest who supplies Israel with the most military equipment. Their citizens, their populations have turned against Israel. Talk more of the rest of the world. Do you understand? So it's what Netanyahu is doing is not even in Israel's benefit. But having said that, and I'm so knowing fully well where the world stands, we've seen the way they've been voting in the United Nations Security Council. We've seen all those things unfolding. Global opinion has turned against Israel because of what Netanyahu and his government is doing against the Palestinians. I don't know if Egypt's plan to calm the situation, which is the reason why Egypt has not been making strong stance against Israel with the way they are coming to the Israel. Because even sometimes you see that is the Israeli forces will shoot and Egyptian soldiers at Egypt's border will die. In this course of this thing, Israeli soldiers have killed Egyptian soldiers. Meanwhile, Egypt is not a part of the war. Egypt is not Hamas. We've seen it. We've seen Egyptian soldiers and even people injured with what Israel is doing in Gaza around that Egypt and Gaza border. So many people would have used that as a stand to take a strong stand against Israel. But I believe that Egypt is calming the situation because they don't want things to escalate. Having said that, I don't know how much we can hold the floods. Like I said, Netanyahu is looking for a wider war. This September, Netanyahu plans to address the United Nations General Assembly. I don't know what he wants to say. I don't know what he wants to tell the whole world, but I'm thinking that I'm thinking there may be a world war. I'm thinking there may be a world war. So Netanyahu is going to speak to the General Assembly just for formality because he wants to use the pretext and say, okay, I told the whole world nobody did anything about it, so I'm going out against Iran. Two times Israel has done really provocative things against Iran. Back in April, Israel um, bombed Iran's consulate in Damascus and killed officials. This one now, last month, in is it even beginning of this August or maybe in July, Israel at the inauguration of the new president of Iran, Israel bombed and killed a Hamas official who came to Iran, right? Killed a Hamas official in Iran, capital in the capital city. Now you can say oh, it's Hamas, so it's fair game anywhere. You know, even if Hamas official, let's just say, is in Washington D.C., you cannot strike it. You cannot do that. You can't just so recklessly just bomb somewhere and kill a guest. Kill it. You can even if you want to kill Hamas official, fine, but do it outside. Do it maybe when he's in Palestine. Why didn't he do it in Qatar? Many of these Hamas officials they stay in Qatar. Why is he not bombing Qatar? Why is Netanyahu not bombing Qatar? Because he's looking for war with Iran. And I'm worried that this address he wants to give the United Nations General Assembly is just to say, all right, I told the whole world. I think that they are planning to do something against Iran. So that is why I'm wondering this move that Egypt has been trying to ignore Israeli aggression against Egypt for, for the duration of this whole thing. Is it really going to pay off? Listen, I just mentioned that clearly it looks like war is really coming. But what can we do to stop this thing? Because war is not in the interest of anybody, especially we in Africa. We are still battling what's going on in Sudan. We are battling what's going on in the DRC. We are battling all this banditry and pinch pricks terrorism activities that are going on in many countries in the Sahel region. So we know what it even with Ethiopia, even if they just put an end to the conflict that's going there, there are still some really hot spots. So clearly war is not in the interest of anybody, not just in Africa, but even around the world. We are seeing the way the global economy is going. If you add a global war to that, or a serious regional war like in the Middle East to that, People's incomes will just go up in smoke. So what can we do about it? Is what I've been asking. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. But one thing that I'm thinking is that we can speak up against it, especially people who are in important nations like the United States. And I have quite a number of you who are watching me from the United States. You need to speak up against this. A lot of you are trying, but we need to intensify the efforts. Many of you watch me in the United Kingdom. Speak up against this thing because war is not in the interest of anybody in the world, except your plan is just to burn everything down, then build a new world based on what you want. Maybe you feel like you've been losing for a long time, so you might as well just burn everything down and build up a new thing based on what you want. Or war is not in the interest of anybody. Another thing we can do, we can reach out to our leaders now, not just speaking up on our shows and on social media and the rest of it. We can reach out to our leaders and tell them that they should not allow this. Write to them when they are going to the United Nations. Tell them they should take a strong stand. Not even no, because sometimes the United Nations, because you want certain diplomatic favors with certain countries, you may take a you may abstain in certain important votes. So things like this, we should reach out and say, take a strong stance against war. War is not in the interest of anybody. War is not in the interest of anybody. So I really hope that this fire that Netanyahu, not Israel, Netanyahu, because I know a lot of people in Israel are even speaking out against him. Even some people in the United States are speaking, and I mean government officials like Chuck Schumer. They are speaking up against. Was it Chuck Schumer? I think it was Chuck Schumer. Anyway, they are speaking up against him. But Netanyahu thinks that to preserve his political faith and his political standing, he needs to have a war. The world does not need a war. Another thing we can do is put it in prayer because at this point we need divine intervention. I believe in God. And I know that the prayers can do a lot of things. I've seen prayers work, and not just in my personal life, but even in my country and in relations with nations. So now is the time for everybody to take a strong anti-war stance because war does not benefit any nation, especially we here in Africa. So let me know what you think about Israel saying that they are going to permanently station their military at the border with Egypt and with the blessing of the United States. And even this whole thing that is looking like we may have a global war because of some people are looking to protect their political standing. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends and your family members so that we can reach more people across the world and Africa as we are hoping and we are praying that we do not have a World War III. In the second conversation for today, this week we just got information from the British Armed Forces that they are looking to recruit soldiers from Commonwealth nations, which include nations like Nigeria, Kenya, Cameroon, Ghana, and also non-African countries like India and Sri Lanka. So the reason I'm talking about this, because I know I will not have spoken about it because this is a yearly thing. I believe the Commonwealth recruits soldiers for the British Armed Forces every year, if I'm correct. I believe it's every year. So and then the soldiers they're not really serious soldiers. I don't know if there's unserious soldiers, but they are for roles like musicians and paratroopers and also engineers. So we don't have such a great call for foot soldiers. But the reason I'm speaking about this is that I'm seeing when I saw this news, I checked, and on Twitter, quite a number of people are saying, "Oh, could be my cue to leave my country. The economy in Ghana is bad. The economy in Kenya is bad. Nigeria is going through serious economic issues. So we might as well use this as a pretext to leave. Hopefully, once we get in, we can get it, residency, citizenship, the whole normal conversation." So I want to bring to your knowledge things that have happened to Africans over the years when outsiders went to war and told us to join them. So I want to use this opportunity to look through history, quickly take a look through history and see how African soldiers have fed. Now, this one, they are not real soldiers, but who knows? Are we going to get to the point where we are requesting for more people? Are we going to get to that point? Like I mentioned in the first segment, it looks hopefully we escape this thing, but it looks like Netanyahu's government in Israel is looking for a world war. He's as Netanyahu is looking for a world war. So could this be? Who knows if something breaks out? Are they going to ask Africans to come and fight and die again? Because this is not if God forbid, we are not going to have a world war. But if something breaks out in the Middle East, if because that looks like the hottest point now, if something breaks out in the Middle East and we have a third world war, we can look through history in the first and second world war. How did Africa fare? So those people who are saying yes, we are going to go and fight, it never turns out well for Africa. In fact, in the First World War, African soldiers are called the forgotten soldiers. And I want you to understand what the First World War did to Africa. Because yes, they were fighting Germany. Germany was the enemy, and they were doing it in. They were supposed to be taking place in the Europe. But let's not forget that Africa was also a center of combat. Let's not forget, because then it was colonial powers using their African colonies to fight their wars. That you countries like Great Britain, France, and others, because they wanted to, they not just they used the opportunities to collect German colonies in Africa. They did, but who fought those wars for them? Africans. It was not our headache. What Germany did is not our problem. We were not part of the whole thing because somebody annoyed them in Europe. They decided to go to war. They agreed within themselves there in Europe to go to war. After agreeing within themselves in Europe to go to war, they blew the trumpet for war and they started fighting. Nobody consulted us. But once the fight broke out, they said Africans come and fight. And who did we fight? We fought each other. Yes, we had European leaders, like European military leaders and officials, lead the charge. But African soldiers went to war. They went to war in countries like Cameroon and collected German territories. They went to war. So you see what I'm saying? But who suffered the most? We. Hundreds of thousands of our people died during this war. Many more died of starvation because the war disrupted agriculture. If it was not because we were bombing the farms and everything where we get food from, it was also because the able bodied young men who normally would farm to feed their families and encourage the agriculture business, they were drafted into the war. That was not our business. War that did not concern us. War that they used when they took the German territories after Germany's defeat in the First World War, when they took the German colonial territories in Africa, did they give any of them independence? No, it fell into the control of Britain, France, and the rest of them. Africa lost. The same pattern happened during the Second World War. In fact, one of the build up, one of the things that built up to Ghana, because Ghana is the first nation in Africa to gain independence. One of the things that built up to Ghana gaining independence, it was because of the Accra riots. What happened in the Accra riots? So apparently, when they were taking soldiers from Africa to come and fight their war, to fight for European interests, these Africans were told that they'll get jobs when they get back after the war. They would also get payments. They would take care of them as veterans of war. Well, when the war was over and they came back, many of these Africans, there were no employment for them. Now I want to use Ghana because that's what we are talking about. They used to call it the Gold Coast then. Imagine. They used to call it the Gold Coast then. Anyway, these veterans, these ex-military personnel, they didn't get the employment they were promised. They didn't get the payments, the money they were promised. They didn't get anything. So they said, you know what, you're going to stage a protest. I'm going to march against this whole thing because we went to war to die for you. Many of our people died for you, and those of us who survived, we did not even get the 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 benefits that were owed them, that many of their contemporaries in Europe and the Americas got. Africans didn't get it. So they went in Ghana, they went to stage a protest to say, no, this shouldn't continue. Give us the jobs, give us the economic benefits, give us the money, give us everything that we deserve for our service. When they went to protest, what happened? The British colonial officers shot them and killed three of their leaders. They opened fire for British interests. And that led to the Accra riots that now set the foundation for the independence of Ghana. Then after Ghana gained independence, other countries across Africa began to gain independence. So those of you who are thinking that you want to go and look for green pastures in in Britain by signing up to go and fight, don't forget your history. Don't forget your history. In the First World War, in the Second World War, Africans were the forgotten soldiers. Instead of thinking to use war and fighting for the British armed forces as a pretext to leave your country, let us bring our heads together now to think of how we are going to build our continent. Like I mentioned 2 weeks ago, when we saw those riots in UK, I mentioned back then things like this are likely to continue because the economic situation in Europe is not even a walk in the park. It's not blissful. It's not, particularly the UK. They've been complaining of terrible economic situations for a long time. So don't think that that place you want to run to is better than your country. Well, you may think it's better than your country, but a lot of people who are there complaining. Several people were even there. I saw some videos online. Um, that was a while ago. These people there, they said they will come back to Africa if they could find transport fare. So they, because they do not have transport fare, they have to stay there. I'm saying this because don't I know it's normal to think that the economic situation in several countries are way better than that of your country in Africa. Very likely. But in certain instances, some countries in Africa are doing better economically than many of these countries you think are green pastures. So instead of thinking of going to fight somebody else's war that does not concern you, under the pretext of gaining residency or work permit or citizenship because you died for Britain. Your ancestors died though. Don't forget. See how they were treated. They are the forgotten soldiers. So don't when you instead of thinking of that, let us think of how we can bring our heads together to build Africa. Because this is the only place that we can have so much control over. This is the only place we can really call home. Let us think of how can we build Africa to transform the story of Africa so that this our continent can be a good place to live and safe place to live, economic prosperous place to live, not just for the Africans who live here, but even other people who may decide to relocate here because the economy of Africa is doing very well. By the way, I want to ask before I end this segment, I want to ask a question. These Commonwealth soldiers that Britain is trying to recruit so that they can help the British armed forces. What have we in Africa? What have we gained from the Commonwealth? Because many times I try to take a look at this thing. The Commonwealth exists, yes. But what do we gain from being a part of it? I don't even know. If you ask me, that lives in a Commonwealth nation, citizen of a so-called Commonwealth nation, I've not gained anything from Commonwealth, and I don't even see. Each time I've taken a look, I have not seen how the Commonwealth has benefited Nigeria or any country in Africa. If you, I want you to answer that question for yourself. What have you in your country in Africa? What have you gained from being a part of the Commonwealth? Or if you as a person, haven't gained anything, what has your country gained from being a part of the Commonwealth? These are questions we need to begin to ask. And if we look closely and we've not gained anything, and we look at the near future and the distant future, and it doesn't seem that we in Africa are gaining anything from the Commonwealth, is it not now time to begin to ask ourselves, what are we doing in this institution? Is it not time to begin to ask, what are we still doing here? Why are we not leaving? I'll leave you to answer that question for yourself. So tell me what you think. The Commonwealth is looking to recruit soldiers for the British Armed Forces, and a lot of Africans are getting excited at the idea. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends and families so that this message can reach more people across Africa as we are in such a critical time. This is a very existential time for Africa to build itself so that we can compete on a global stage because the wealth, the prosperity, and the success of Africa right now more than ever is needed. We're in a very existential moment. From the British Armed Forces and the Commonwealth, we come to Burkina Faso. News just came out that the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, has just rejected an IMF loan. Now, before now, I know that back in March, yes, I think that was, yes, I think it was March. There was in March and there was in June. So the IMF and Burkina Faso have been having conversation for loan. So the government can undertake some development projects within the country. So they've been having those. I know they've had 2 rounds of talks. They had one in March. They had one in June. Now this August, this week, Ibrahim Traore came out and said, "You know what? We don't want the IMF loan." So I don't know what the conversation they had was, and I don't know what the IMF was requesting. behind the scene. But I know that the president has come out to say they are going to move on and look for how they can develop their country without getting loan from the IMF. Now, if you've watched this show for as long as we've been up, it just started in June 2024 is when I started this show. But if you've watched this show for any length of time, you know that I am not a fan of the IMF. I think the IMF causes more harm than it does good. I think the IMF is supposed to be branded, is supposed to be branded an economic terrorist because the IMF completely impoverishes nations. So you already know that stand, but I want to really tell you my three major issues with the IMF. Number one, the IMF will trap you in debt. You are just going to be in a cycle of debt, and then you realize that the money you took as loan from them after making concessions and agreeing to their conditionalities. You have laid down, you have agreed to the conditionalities, but yet the money you took, it seems that you can't get anything done. So you're trapped in a cycle of debt. You're just taking debt to pay back, taking debt to pay back. At the end of the day, there's nothing you can use that money to do in your country. The IMF loan, IMF debt is never taken, if it was not intended for you to take it to be able to do something with it. That is number one issue, my number one issue with the IMF. My number two issue is that with all these conditionalities, you do not have economic sovereignty. They keep pushing and saying, like in the case of Nigeria, this recent one that we just saw, that it was the IMF that said Nigeria should remove fuel subsidy. It was the IMF that told us that we should increase tax. It was the IMF that told Nigeria to remove to increase the energy, like the electricity tariff. It was the IMF that told Nigeria to float the naira. We should not do capital controls in Nigeria. It was the IMF. We look at Kenya, the protest we saw in Kenya that nearly burnt the country to the ground. It was IMF. That tax that Ruto set into place was set into place with the instruction of the IMF. Let's go to the top of Africa. See what is going on in Egypt. And their currency is tanking. The cost of fuel, the cost of living, everything has skyrocketed is because they were implementing policies that the IMF asked them to. If we look in Ghana, the same story. We look in Ethiopia, it's the same story. All across the continent, it's the IMF. It's the IMF. So is this because of this instruction from IMF to do this and do that? Our nations in Africa, and not just in Africa, really any country that takes IMF loan, we do not have sovereignty to make economic decisions that will benefit the country and the people living in the country. That is my second issue with the IMF. The third one is that they have now left their economic terrorism. They, yes, I said it. They've now left their economic terrorism and they are coming out to do political terrorism. Now, it's not enough for the IMF to say we are going to hijack you economically. Now they're trying to hijack you culturally and politically. Look at what just happened with Uganda. Uganda was looking for loan from the IMF, and the IMF and Uganda were agreeing to conditions laid down by the IMF. Then Uganda said, "Oh no, we cannot do LGBT. You can't make LGBTQ a national policy." Because of that, IMF said they're not going to give Uganda loan. So now it's beginning to look like the IMF is and the money they are the loans they're supposedly giving. It's looking like this is now supposed to be they're using this to get to change your political systems and your cultural system. It's bad enough they've taken control of the economy. Now they are doing this with our politics and our culture. That's the problem with the IMF loans for me. And that is why Chinese loans are looking more favorable to African countries because they don't give you all this headache of things to do and things not to do. So this update from Burkina Faso has really piqued my interest because I want to see, I want to see what Burkina Faso does. We all know that in the context of global affairs and even within Africa, Burkina Faso is not a rich country. It's not a rich country globally. It's not even one of the richest countries within Africa. So it's a really impoverished nation. And they're saying, let us jump out and do this thing ourselves. So I'm curious to see what happens with Burkina Faso. How are they going to navigate this? What do they? Because I really want to see because how is it that Burkina Faso is going to experiment with this thing and show we other countries in Africa that you know what? It's possible to do things for your country without trapping yourself to debt from the IMF. I want to read the quotes of the president of Burkina Faso when he said that they're not going to proceed to get the loan from the IMF. Ibrahim Traore said, when he was speaking of rejecting the loans from the IMF. He said, Africa doesn't need Africa doesn't need the World Bank, IMF, Europe, or America. We have what it takes to grow our economy without loans and refuse to be financial slaves. That's inspiring. It's really inspiring what he said. So I want to see now that he has decided, they in Burkina Faso have decided that let them chart a new course for their country outside of these Western, not just Western, but outside of these financial institutions that have a history filled with impoverishing nations, not just African countries. If you look in Asia, the same thing. If you look in places like in Europe, like Romania, the same story. So as they're coming out to chart this new course, hopefully they can show we other countries in Africa. You see, we can do this thing. And who knows this system that Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso is going to lay down? Who knows if this system is now going to prove so successful that we in the rest of Africa can implement it into our respective countries to get similar or maybe even better results. I'm really rooting for Burkina Faso because this president, Ibrahim Traore, is so inspiring, the things he wants to do for his country. Sometimes when I listen to him and all the big goals and the lofty things he's saying, you know, it's really inspiring. And I'm not surprised that some people who are not in favor of the independence of Africa, the economic independence of Africa, they've tried several times to assassinate him. He just escaped another assassination attempt. Then hopefully Burkina Faso will show the rest of Africa because when one person gets it right, it can inspire others to do the same. When I spoke in the previous segment about the Commonwealth looking to recruit soldiers for the British Armed Forces, I mentioned the Accra riots that led to Ghana gaining independence. And when Ghana gained independence, what happened? Other African countries began to gain independence. So sometimes when one thing happens, it's not a secluded issue or a secluded affair. It can inspire others to follow the same route. If you look in Nigeria, for example, the Dangote refinery, against all odds, he's insisting, and I'm supporting him, he's insisting that the refinery works. And this, now that he's pushing, regardless of opposition, to get the refinery up and running, we just saw news that came out this week that Ghana is setting up its own refinery, mega refinery. That's good. Two African countries. And I'm saying that because the next thing you're going to see, the more successful Dangote is in with his refinery, and the more we're able to break this system of leaving Africa as just a place to export raw materials, other African nations are beginning will get inspired to set up their refineries, to begin to add value to their raw materials within the continent. And this is the way Africa will get economic prosperity. So I'm really rooting for Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore, and I want to see the system they lay down working without loans from the IMF, the World Bank, and the rest of it. I want to see what they lay down. And this, who knows? And hopefully, this can be a model for other African nations to adopt. The only problem is that I hope they allow him do it because, like I said, there's been several attempts to take his life, several assassination attempts he has experienced in such a short time to show you that what he's doing can work. And when it works, it will serve as a guiding light for other countries within the continent. So let me know what you think about this development in Burkina Faso, where Ibrahim Traore is saying no to the IMF loan. And then, in fact, you also mentioned the World Bank. Let me know what you think about this development in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends so that and family so that we can reach more people across the continent and the world. Well, that's it. That's all we are covering in this episode of the Amanda Show. From Israel saying they are going to permanently station troops in the border between of Gaza and Egypt, to the Commonwealth recruiting soldiers from Nigeria, Ghana, opening recruitment of soldiers from Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Kenya, and the rest of them, recruiting them for the British Armed Forces. And also to Burkina Faso's president saying no to the IMF loan. Let me know what you think about all the stories in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends so that we can reach more people across the continent. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you in the next episode of The Amanda Show. Bye bye.